This year I had an abundance of elderberries on my elderberry plants, and I decided to dehydrate a bunch of them. I tested 3 different ways of dehydrating elderberries in the dehydrator, and today I'm going to bring you the results. It's Jody with All About the Harvest, where I teach you how to grow, use, and preserve your harvest. And today we're talking about dehydrated elderberries. So first, when you're going to be dehydrating elderberries, you need to get them off of the stems. And so I tried multiple ways of getting them off of the stems. And the first way was just using my fingers. So taking them to get them off of the stems, just using my fingers. And then the second way I tried was by using a fork, which I'll show you how to do that here. So you can just take these off with your finger, but after you do that a while, your fingers will be purple. So a really easy way is to use a fork. And you just take the fork and you run it through and they just come off. Now normally I would be doing this in a bowl, but I just grabbed a plate real quickly just to show you. So very simple. You just take your fork and you run it through and see how they just pop off. Occasionally you might have to pull some out of the prongs of the fork, but this is a real quick and simple way to do it. Also, you will have less staining on your hands. You'll still have some, but less. This one was not as full as something like this, but it also works with this as well. When I have something that's a big one like this, I usually take one little section at a time and I just work through it like that. Again, you want to do this in a bowl. And then sometimes you'll get, you might just accidentally take off an entire little portion there. I just pick it up, work it through, and then keep going. So the third way to get those elderberries off of the stems is by freezing them first. So you would freeze them on the actual stems themselves, and then you take them off of the stems. And so what I did when I tried this method is I washed them, rinse them off as much as I could, and then I put them on a tray with the stems up and the berries down. So I just flash froze them on a tray in my freezer for a few hours. You could put them in a container and freeze them for longer if you needed. And then when I took them out, I didn't actually use a fork to separate them because they were frozen. Some of them were actually frozen to the bottom of the tray, but the ones that weren't, so I just picked up that whole stem, and then I just took my hands and just kind of ran my hands through, rubbing the berries through my hands, and they came off actually rather easily. However, my hands were really cold by the end of it that I needed to run them under hot water. So I actually didn't prefer that method. Also, because the ones that were stuck on the bottom, some of them still had some of the stem portions on, and because I had rinsed them before putting them in the freezer, they had water on them and water was kind of pooled up on the bottom. So then there were like little chunks of ice, and some of them were stuck in little chunks of ice. So I actually didn't prefer that method, mainly because of the cold on my hands, but then also with those ice chunks and then them sticking and not really being able to get them off until they thawed a little bit more. So they definitely came off quicker than just using your hands prior to freezing. But with the fork method, I felt like that was kind of the best of both options. I didn't have to worry about freezing them and my hands being cold and the ice chunks, and it was still really quick. So my method of getting the elderberries off of the stems, preferred method for me would be the fork method. The second method would be freezing and then taking them off. And then the last method is just taking them off with your hands, because that's the longest and it's gonna stain your hands the most. So then it's time to rinse the berries so they're clean before you dehydrate them. And then you just put them on your dehydrator trays and put them in single layers. So you don't want to have them piled up, so you want to have them in a single layer.
So when I did my first batch of elderberries, this was my first batch that I did, and I dehydrated them at 135 degrees until they were dry and crunchy. When I got done with these, I was wondering if I had dehydrated them at too high of a temperature. I have 4 elderberry plants and they were producing well this year. I ended up doing a second batch, and I did that batch. I did it the same way as far as, you know, cleaning the elderberries and all that, but I did it at 125 degrees instead of 135 degrees. And I wanted to see if there was a big time difference, or if the scent of the elderberries that were dehydrated, if they had a less of a burnt smell to them, almost like a cooked smell to them. So I decided to try them at 125 degrees, and I did that. And it did indeed have a less pungent odor, maybe. Not that it's not bad. It's just that the berries that I had purchased from another retailer years ago smelled more sweet and not really having that burnt flavor. They smelled more sweet. Now, they were also smaller, and you know, they were European versus I have the Adams elderberry variety, so I'm not sure if that had something to do with it. So I decided to dehydrate them at the 125 degrees, and again, that did diminish the smell as far as temperature or as far as length of time wise. I don't remember exactly. I think it probably took a little bit longer, but the time didn't really matter to me. It was more so, was I like cooking the nutrients out? Was I dehydrating them at too much of a temperature? And so out of the two temperatures, I decided 125 degrees was better, because it didn't have that more burnt or cooked smell to it. And I felt like the color also, you know, I was looking at the color and I felt like maybe the color was a little bit better dehydrated from 125 versus 135. So I just decided to stick with the 125 degree temperature. Again, though, that scent, I was just like, okay, the scent was less, but it still didn't smell like the ones that I had previously purchased that I had just a little bit left. I did read somewhere that you could freeze the elderberries first and then dehydrate them. So that's what I decided to do. I decided to freeze the next batch and then dehydrate them. And what I got was, while these were all the same elderberries from the same plants, the same sizes originally, the dehydrated version that was first frozen was smaller, so it did end up being smaller. It also looks like it's darker than the other ones, so maybe it didn't lose as much of that color. And if you think about when you freeze something first, those cell walls will kind of break, and so I'm thinking maybe this didn't get as cooked as much inside of the berry without it before it broke versus these. Smell-wise, I don't think it really had much impact on the smell. So maybe that's a temperature setting. Maybe I could have tried these at a smaller or at a lesser temperature, because I did do these at 125. Maybe I could have tried it at maybe like 120 or 115. They were much, much messier. They were much more difficult to get off of the dehydrator trays. I literally had to take a scraper to scrape them off of my plastic trays, whereas with these two, I didn't have to do that. I basically just kind of rubbed my hand over to get them to kind of unstick, but they didn't have like these big purple puddles of liquid under them, the juice from the berries, as this method, the freezing them first, did. I will say though, with the frozen first, it did probably keep them darker, because that's, I mean, if you could see, this does look a little bit darker than these two. And they are smaller, probably because, again, the cell walls broke with freezing, but they were way messier and way more of a pain in the butt to dehydrate or to get off versus the other two. this one also was very, very messy, very, very sticky. In fact, these are kind of tacky and more in clumps, than these are more individual berries. You can probably see and hear that. These are kind of a little bit more stuck together. So what I learned is that I would not dehydrate, I would not freeze them first and then dehydrate them. I felt like that was more of a mess and not really needed. Just added another step into that process. I did freeze them individually, so I put them on stainless steel pans and an aluminum pan, and with a single layer of them, and then let them kind of flash freeze, and then I took them off and then I put them in the dehydrator. So that's how I froze them. I didn't freeze them in a bag in a clump. So that is how I froze it. I do freeze elderberries, and that is the way I will freeze them, is by putting them in on a single sheet, freeze them individually, then take them off and put them in a bag and freeze them that way for just frozen elderberries. But for dehydrating them, I wouldn't choose to do that. I would actually just rather take the fresh berries and put them on the dehydrator tray. My recommendation is that if you have a dehydrator that has a temperature setting on it, I would dehydrate them at 125 degrees. I wouldn't start any higher than that. If, however, you wanted to go lower than that, I would recommend starting in 5-degree increments lower. So maybe try 120 and then go down to 115. And I may do that in the future. Now, if you have wild elderberries are going to be smaller and they will definitely dehydrate quicker. These were the Adams elderberry cultivar variety, and these berries were very large in relation to regular wild elderberries. So these were going to take a little bit longer to dehydrate. So start out at 125 degrees and then play with that and see if that works for you, or if you wanted to go a little bit lower. You don't want to go so low that it takes forever for them to dehydrate and then they could mold in your dehydrator or start to go bad in the dehydrator. But you also don't want to dehydrate at too high of a temperature so that it's, cooking the fruit and taking out some of those nutrients. So you want to preserve the nutrients of the elderberry as much as possible, but you also want to dehydrate it at a safe temperature as well. Now, if your dehydrator does not have a temperature setting on it, then just go ahead and dehydrate them until they're dry. Again, using the methods that I recommended, I would use the fork method to get them off of there. I would make sure you're washing them. I use a strainer and then get them on those dehydrator trays, and then I dehydrate them until they're crunchy, like they're hard. So that is what my recommendation is for you. The amount of time will depend based on the humidity of your home, obviously the temperature setting, and the type of dehydrator that you have. It's also good to rotate your dehydrator trays throughout the dehydrating process just to make sure that you're getting an even dehydration. So if you have an Excalibur like me and it has a fan blowing from the back to the front, then what I do is I just rotate the trays so that what was in the front is now in the back. If you have a stackable dehydrator, then take the bottom ones and rotate to the top and just move them that way. I would say a minimum, just rotate them at least once so that you get some even dehydrating. If you are interested in more elderberry videos, I did make a video on how to make a vegan 3-ingredient elderberry tea from dried elderberries. I will link that video here. I also made a video on how to make an elderberry syrup from elderberry juice. I will link that video here as well, and I'll also put these videos in the description below this video and at the end of this video. If you like more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel and hit that bell button to be notified when I post a new video each Wednesday. If you have somebody that might be interested in this video, please share this video with them. So that is my take on dehydrating elderberries in a dehydrator. I definitely do it at 125 degrees. I would not freeze my elderberries first. Again, this is Jody with All About the Harvest, where I teach you how to grow, use, and preserve your harvest. I hope you learned something about dehydrating elderberries today, and I will see you next Wednesday.